I mean, do you mind expanding? Also, I'd just like to point out if you are going to make a smooth transition, it makes it far unsmoother when you say that you are making one.
Shush, shush, shush.
But what do you mean by your question, if you don't mind? Because it's very big, it's very broad.
How do you view religion? What is your stance on religion?
I mean, I,
Are
I
you
guess I
religious?
I think religion's a great thing. I mean, it has the power both to unite and divide people, and I think you only need to look at current news, but also history to understand the power of religion over people. I mean, quite a lot of atheists do say that people who are religious are sheep. But I would disagree with that. I think religion, it must stem from somewhere, or else an idea would never have been created in the first place. Moreover, if you see the influence that it has over people, not that many people can be sheep and following this one shepherd, if I think personally. And so I think religion is something that's very powerful, and I think it's something that it's a very welcoming community, depending on what religious group you're a part of. Like, in the sense that, because there are obviously lots of denominations of certain groups, and some of them are slightly more culty and quite suppressive, whilst others are more open. And so, yeah, I guess those are my initial thoughts on religion. And I think they're also extremely powerful in the sense that, in terms of the way we live our lives today, the influence of religion, without religion, we wouldn't have come as far as we have today when looking at things like ethics, when looking at things like science. And so, yeah, I would say that. What about you, Dylan?
I have again come back to this position that I'm really happy I have actually, that religion does play a really important role in society. I read an Oxford article, funnily enough, regarding religion, and it suggested that it seems paradoxical, so really confusing to suggest that in order to produce a multi-faith society and an open and tolerant society, religion sometimes must be suppressed and religious views must be suppressed in this wave of new atheism. And while I think that, I think all people should have a say, it just struck an interesting sort of chord in my body in terms of, I do think religion does play a lot of weight. Like, we look at some of the groundbreaking scientists like Isaac Newton, for example. It's commonly read in his writings that he was really interested in Christianity and in God. And you look at someone like Descartes, for example, who is one of the most, he's probably the father of modern philosophy, and he's one of the most influential philosophers of all time. And he was a devout Christian. And I'm not saying to use this as Christianity as an example, but what I'm saying is I think religious people, they're not just people who follow God or believe in God or believe in this higher power. They're people who have faith, but they have a lot to play in society, and religion as a whole guides us with principles, ethics, like you said. And I think that it does play a really important role in society. I think where the fine line is where people use religion for their own personal agendas. And I use this phrase lightly in the sense of people using religion to gain power, for example, or when religion becomes ideological extremism, and that fine line between both. And honestly, I can't really comment too much on it because I just don't have the knowledge to do so. But I think that's sort of where how people use the teachings or the laws or commands that are given in scripture or whatever. That's sort of where the fine line is. But the actual concept of religion and having a community based around one sole faith, I think it's beautiful. I genuinely do.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I would have to agree wholeheartedly with that. I mean, and also you mentioned Isaac Newton, but in terms of like scientists that believe in religion or philosophers, I mean, you don't need to look for particularly far. You have like sort of Pascal, Leibniz. I mean, Pascal had this great thing called the Pascal's wager. You have John Dalton, I think, Michael Faraday. These are all believers in religion, and I think, yeah, it's incredible. But I do believe what you say, that some people do use religion for their advantage or to push their own agenda. Um, I think a great example of this. I would like to stress the importance of this. So this is just an accusation. Is in what's it called? Satya Sai Baba, who is an Indian guru, um, and he performed these miracles. He was accused of in 1995 on a TV documentary called Guru Busters. They accused him of faking his materializations of different things. And I think that's when religion becomes quite dangerous often. It's when people gain this power, people can gain this authority over people, that whatever they do and whatever they say, people believe automatically. And I think that that's something that is very dangerous regarding religion. But I would like to stress, but I would like to contradict this and say that people have the right to say whatever they want and lie about whatever they want. Um, but I mean, that's obviously playing the devil's advocate role, and it's not necessarily something I believe in. But yeah,
I guess touching upon that, I don't know if you want to comment on your own religious journey, but has that potential for religion to be used as a weapon for personal agendas? Has that ever put you off being religious as a person?
um, I mean, I'm quite open. I mean, I do say I'm half Hindu, I'm half Jain. Um, I know some people say it's impossible to be two, but I think Jainism, it as much as it is a religion, it's also, is what you said. It's a way of life, and I know people describe Hinduism in the same way, but in Jainism you don't believe in a god, in Hinduism you do, and so there's lots of differences between the two, but I
Mm,
think they interlink very nicely together.
mm,
Um, and I and I wouldn't say I've ever thought, wow, this person's a scam, therefore I won't believe in religion. Because I think religion, or the way religion was proposed to me as a child by my grandparents, I mean things like Diwali, things like Navratri, and all these festivals and stuff that you partake in, it's kind of like forced onto you, and so you wouldn't necessarily question it. But as you grow older, you may think, okay, why am I doing this? And then you realize, as much as it's religious, it's also very much a part of your culture and a part of your family and your family history. And I think that is what's led me not to question necessarily and try and scrutinize religion as much as possible, and made me look at religion in a much more favorable light, as it's been something over hundreds of years that have united, if not thousands, that have united members of my family or my forefathers together. And so, yeah, I would say that I would say I've kind of ignored the negatives of religion, especially if I were to describe myself as someone who is religious.
mm. I think it's extremely important, that point that you touched upon with regards to, I'd say, some people who question religion, and I'm pointing here to the new atheists who are quite openly critical of religion, in the sense of they try to use empirical, so through sense experience or observation, and they try and use real scientific reasoning to disprove the fact that religion can exist. And I'm pointing to people like Dawkins, for example, and Dawkins, theories when it comes to, it just doesn't seem logically and scientifically possible that religion and that this God exists. And I think sometimes you need to understand what religion actually is. And there's this quote that we talk about in philosophy class, which is quite interesting, because a quarter of the philosophy course is about philosophy of religion. And it's, do the philosophers and do the scientists see a different God to the theologians and the theists? So it's basically suggesting, is the God of the theologians and the religious believers different to the God of the philosophers when they're talking about the same thing? And I think it's quite an interesting conversation to have, because philosophers and scientists love logic. Logic is their binding, force. Something has to be logically possible for us to even conceive of it. Whereas theologians and theists and religious believers are willing to go beyond that, and that sometimes it is just purely about faith. But then what does faith mean? And it's interesting questions where we pose that. And I guess for you guys at home, start thinking about that. Like, if you are religious or you aren't religious, I don't know. It's quite interesting to have a conversation with your parents regarding, what does faith actually mean? What does it mean to be faithful in something, or to have hope? And I think, yeah, just drawing back to my earlier point, this question of do the philosophers and religious believers see a same God or a different God? I think you can ultimately conclude that they do see a very similar God. It's just which side do they stress on, faith or logic? And I do believe that sometimes where this bout of new atheism has missed its mark and ultimately lost its traction that it was once gaining in the early 2000s, is because they miss this mark of what God and religion is truly about. It's not about providing a infallible account, so completely true account of how knowledge and reality came to be. Although in scripture, for example, it might proclaim to do so. I think for the broader picture and for the broader religious believers, it's about cultivating a greater community, as I said, around one key faith. Um, so that's why I sort of think this new atheism has sort of died out eventually. I don't know. What's your thoughts on that?
I mean, I'm not particularly read on new atheism specifically. I mean, I, yeah, I guess I would agree. I think,
Have you
well,
you've heard of Dawkins though, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
Dawkins. I think everyone's heard of,
Yeah,
or quite a
exactly.
lot of people, but a lot of people who've done like what's it called, religious studies at GCSE. When doing your thematic paper for AQA, would you must have
Yeah.
seen a quote from a teacher about the God delusion. I think was the name of the book.
Yeah. I've
They
read the
wrote,
book. It's an interesting book.
but I forgot your question now.
What do you
Um,
believe in terms of when it comes to okay, here's the question. Do you think philosophers and scientists against theologians and religious believers see the same God? It's a very deep question, but I don't know.
um, I would say that no one sees the same God.
Okay.
I think God's unique to every individual person, every individual group, and I think that's why over time people have moved away from such, and why there have been new creations and denominations, certain religions. I mean, I think a great example would be, I mean, I think one of the probably most famous example would be in Christianity. You have
Mm,
Catholicism and Protestantism, and within that, you have certain groups. You have Presbyterians, different things like that, and Methodists, and the list goes on. And I think that suggests that people don't necessarily see the same thing, but believe in similar things, and that means that God is unique to every individual. God is created differently for every individual. And yes, so I would say that people do see different gods at all times, and that's why some scientists do believe in God, some scientists don't. You may see God as perfect, someone else may not see God as perfect. Someone may see God as all powerful, but then someone may see that God isn't all powerful because, I mean, probably maybe the problem of evil, for example, proves
mm.
that God can't be all powerful and all loving at the same time. And so, yeah, different things like that.
I guess yeah, maybe what we're pulling on is the fact that God's greatest strength and religion's greatest strength is that people see their own God and they see their version of God, which helps them find a little bit of peace in a world where we are troubled by a lot of instability. Potentially, that's one of religion's greatest pulling strengths. Not necessarily to be the opiate of the man, as Karl Marx said, but generally just to provide people with a bit of peace and a bit of foundation to move on with their lives and to lead their lives with a bit of clarity.